Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Duke, and welcome to Political Jazz at Oliver McGee. Each week, we dive into D.C. politics and speak directly to former White House senior advisor, Oliver McGee. Oliver, this past week, our nation's 41st president, George Herbert Walker Bush, passed away at the ripe old age of 94. He served as a pilot during World War II, a U.S. representative, director of the CIA, vice president under Reagan, and president of the United States. He is also one of only two presidents in history to have a son also become president. You could say he spent most of his life serving America. When he was in office, he was an interesting guy. I know you have a lot of experience being in the White House, understanding what it's like at that level. We don't. Most Americans don't know what it's like on a daily basis. First, start by talking a little bit about what's it like to live your life at the highest levels of American government. What's it like day to day?
Well, it's a very long day. It starts at 7 a.m. in the morning and it ends around 10 p.m. every day. What you're doing is trying to make sure that you serve your principal and you give up your hours and your life becomes the hours of your principal that you're serving. So you're really at the beck and call of their schedule. It's a fun day. It's always something to do. You're never watching the clock. There's always a very, very fast rush to get so many pieces of paper out the door, and writing letters and correspondences and speeches, and at the same time making sure that you meet the objectives of your principal that you're serving.
So in all your experience in Washington, D.C., did your paths ever cross with George H.W. Bush?
No, it did not. But I did wanted to share with our audience today that today is a very, very special day. The reason the media is paying so much attention to the Bush legacy, because it is resting very strongly in American aristocracy and also American wealth. It goes way, way back to the Brown family and the Harriman family, which was really on the Democratic side. But it's a touch back to the days of bipartisanship, and this is what the Bush family is about. This is the last president of the greatest generation, and this man, George H. Walker Bush, as well as George W. Bush, Bush 41 and Bush 43, they go back to Prescott Bush, which was really going back to the Harriman family, the Brown family, and private banking. And also that goes back to the Rothschilds. That takes us back to old wealth in the Roman Empire as well as the English Empire in private international banking. And when you look at private international banking, for which the Bush family pulls from, that's bipartisanship, because money is not left or right, it's just green. And so that's really what we were really looking at in the Bush legacy, is how this family amassed such a fortune to be able to finance governments and also monarchies and empires as well.
Well, I think it's a brilliant observation you make that this is really the last greatest generation president, the last president to have a tie to that sort of global struggle. But let me ask you about the bipartisan question. On one level, I think you're absolutely right. But it seems to me that both George H.W. Bush and his son, George W. Bush, were always more willing to reach out to the other side, to the left. I don't really recall the left reaching out to them. Have we reached the point in American politics where bipartisanship only exists if the right is willing to talk to the left? It never seems to go the other way.
Well, that's a good point, Dr. Duke, because Prescott Bush was working with Eisenhower to really put the legislation for the interstate highway system. But at the same time, he was working with the establishment of the United Negro College Fund, which I was a former senior vice president, and he was working with the Rockefeller Foundation. And so he was also working with Planned Parenthood. A lot of people don't know that. And that's really where I think the son, Herbert Walker, got his whole stance on looking at how do you work with intelligence and artillery, but also how do you work with bipartisan issues across the board, including how you look at taxes and things of that sort. But at the same time, President Bush, 41, said that some of the Democrats that he was working with were very, very partisan, very, very, very hard to move across or jump the aisle, you might say. And that was how he got into the no new taxes debacle. So the thing is that that's really continuing on today. today. But today, I think it's a lot more partisan. And I think during that time, what they're celebrating today is that we could get some things done. But I think most of the time, the media that's on the left was really celebrating how they were able to convince Bush 41 to give some of their issues, while at the same time, it actually cost him his second term of his presidency.
It is very incongruous, too, to see Donald Trump and Melania sitting next to Barack Obama and Michelle, who are sitting next to Hillary and Bill. And I realize the protocol, the order of the presidencies, those things all matter. But I mean, when you think about what Obama and Michelle Obama have within the last week, the nasty and often dishonest things that they have said about Trump, the way they have been absolutely quiet about attacks on Melania, the way they would not have put up, and the Republicans would not have put up with the same kind of attacks on Michelle Obama when she was president. How do we square this circle? I mean, you see these, are these funerals, are these really unifying moments, or moments that demonstrate that we can be bipartisan, or are they just a kind of political kabuki theater?
Well, they are what they are. They are really a look at the Club of Presidents. It would have been very difficult for all of the presidents who are alive not to be there, because this is the Club of Presidents. And whether we see in our daily news that there is struggles between both sides of the aisle, when you are in the Club of Presidents, or when you're in the Club of Senators, you really are in the seat of power. You're in the club of power and influence. And you'd be very surprised how much the club of influence and power actually agree. It's only when we see the theater in the media that we see the divide, and most importantly, that is presented to the American people. But I think right now we're seeing a brand new media, like the new media we're talking about right now, where that discussion is taking a different dimension. This new media, like the Freedom Project, is opening the door for we, the people, to have a voice in that conversation, in that club of power and influence. And I think that's what you're seeing taking place so prevailing right now in the national discourse and discussion. And that is the essence of democracy. And sometimes democracy is messy, as it is trying to get clean.
One thing we know as we wrap up here today is that George H.W. Bush and his son George Bush pretty much followed the long legacy of American presidents, the President's Club, of keeping their mouths relatively quiet about their successors. That seems to have been completely shattered by Barack Obama, who has been almost from the beginning, even before Trump became president, was leveling partisan and intense criticism against the candidate and now the president. Do you think that that's, in the same way the media has changed a little bit, do you think presidential decorum is going to change now in the wake of how Obama has sort of revolutionized in some ways the office of post-presidency as itself a radical political weapon?
The presidential power of persuasion is going to change as we change the technology for which the presidencies use to do their power of persuasion. Right now, we have almost instantaneous communication channels available to the presidency. And Donald Trump is clearly demonstrating that now through his Twitter. But that's going to change. If you think Twitter is going to remain the same, or Facebook, or even this particular medium we're speaking on now is going to stay the same, that's not going to happen. It's going to get faster. Communications is going to get faster. And how the president utilizes his or her power of persuasion in the future will be governed by what the available tools of technology are available to them. When you look back at old monarchies like King George V, who pulled in radio, or even when you look at Queen Elizabeth, who pulled in the art of television, or when you look into how our own presidents, Bill Clinton was really pushing in the envelope of fast television, and now we're looking at Donald Trump pushing in social media into the presidency. All of those different types of technology is changing how presidents communicate and how they persuade and not persuade sometimes. So we're going to see that the advances of technology is going to take a larger role, and that's why the president needs some really good technology advice available as the presidency changes, as technology is in the hands of the people and the presidency.
Oliver, it's a pleasure, my friend. Let's talk again next week on Political Jazz.